Welcome to Homeschool Companion, your source for information, motivation, and inspiration. If you're part of the homeschool community or simply interested in learning more about home-based education, stay tuned. Together we'll examine the latest resources, learning styles, and teaching techniques. We'll speak with experts in the field to help you uncover every homeschool advantage. We'll also present suggestions on how to keep Christ in the curriculum as we explore fresh ways to teach and learn. Here's your Homeschool Companion host, author, educator, and children's ministry specialist, Dr. Rose Gamblin.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And, today we're going to go to the forest. So we've been out in outer space this week and into the ocean, and now we're going to the forest. National champion trees. And our verse is Ezekiel 31:5. Therefore, his height was exalted above all the trees of the field, and his boughs were multiplied, and his branches became long because of the multitude of waters when he shot forth. Ezekiel 31:5. A national champion tree is one that is the tallest or has the greatest trunk circumference of all the trees of its kind in the nation. The American Forestry Association, that's known as AFA, keeps a record of all the national champion trees in the United States. A copy of the list may be obtained from the association. This association also provides a pamphlet entitled How to Measure a Tree for AFA's Big Tree Contest upon request. There are record-breaking champions for more than 500 species in the United States. The tallest tree in the United States is also the tallest tree in the world. This tree, a redwood more than 350 feet tall, is found near the coast of northern California, and it is still growing. The next tallest species is the sequoia, also of California. One of these is more than 270 feet high. This tree is followed by the Sitka spruce, with one in Washington State that is nearly 250 feet tall. Next is a Douglas fir in Washington State with a height of 220 feet. The sequoia is also the tree with the largest circumference. The champion measures more than 83 feet around its trunk and is one of the very few trees that have a name. It is called General Sherman. Eastern trees also have champions. The tallest eastern white pine in the United States is a 158-foot tree in Michigan. Right behind it is a 147-foot tree in Maine, the Pine Tree State, which is nearly a foot larger in circumference. Many times in the Bible, trees are used to represent people and nations or their characteristics. Our text figuratively describes the Assyrian nation in its pride, but in verse 12, its destruction is described, a fare of which every nation and person eventually suffers when they become too proud. So today we're talking about champions, and I like to think that when it talks about they grow up because of the multitude of waters, this is taken from the King James Version, but when you have a source of water, trees flourish. And when we as human beings connect with that source of living waters, we too will flourish. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I hold up to you today that listener that needs your healing touch, that listener who has suffered loss, and that listener who is seeking you. May they have the peace that passes understanding. May they drink from the waters that will never run dry, and may you become real to them. I thank you for the opportunity of talking and praising you through education, and may our words be your words today. All this I pray in thy holy name. Amen. Ta-da! Arts and crafts. So we're talking about tall trees, and I've put a little video on my Pinterest site. That's mrgamblin2 if you want to go there and check it out. Just a little video answering the question, what's the biggest tree in the world? And then for the craft, I have a picture there of a 3D paper Christmas tree luminary. And you would fold this almost like how you would a snowflake. But instead, you put it over one of those little candles that you get, those little electric candles that you get in you can get them in the Dollar Tree or the dollar store. And they make just the cutest little luminary. You can make your little forest. And then I'm thinking you should go outside and actually find the biggest tree in your neck of the woods. Measure the circumference, and it's great to learn how to measure the height of a tree using a ratio based on your shadow and how tall you are to the shadow of the tree and how tall the tree is. You can get pretty close, and that's really cool. So have fun learning. Curriculum Corner. And we're talking all week about handwriting. We're doing everything to avoid the desperation grip. In fact, if your older children do the desperation grip, well, I'm sorry. It's hard to unteach that desperation grip, but it can be done. There's little devices you can put on pencils that help them learn the right way to grip it. But it's because they started learning to write at such a young age when they weren't really ready for it. And when we say handwriting, right now we're mainly talking about manuscript. But a lot of the things that we develop and write in manuscript, it really helps us. So, for example, the treehouse, I did put it in a handwriting board in my Pinterest site that you can refer to, and it comes from A Reason for Handwriting, which is a faith-based curriculum. The workbooks aren't very expensive. You do not need the teacher's edition to figure it out. But the treehouse has the roof, and then the ceiling of the treehouse is where your dotted line, your dashed line is, and above that would be the attic. And then you have your main part of the treehouse. And the floor is the floor of the treehouse, and then the ones that dangle below, they're going down the ladder to the ground below. So if you can get your children used to that idea, and now I'm talking about the latter part of first grade into second grade, it will really help them so that they are not drawing all over the place. Well, go to that mrgamblin2 and check it out. Remember, start at the top of the letter and draw without lifting your pencil. You have to lift on a T and an F and an I and a K and a Y. There are lifters. But if you give interesting names to these letters that don't follow the rules, that even makes it more interesting. I have never had a student cry over handwriting, and I've always used A Reason for Handwriting. So have fun. Remember, don't stress out about it. They'll learn it when they're ready. Questions parents ask. Well, here's a very good question. What is one thing teenagers really need today? What is one thing teenagers really need today? And if I can only say one thing, I would say they need to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. But how do they have that relationship? How can you guarantee they'll have that relationship? Well, as parents, the biggest thing that you can do is love God and love each other. That's huge for a teenager, to have a secure home. The homes fall apart when the kids reach that very vulnerable age in their teens. And so if you can give them that, wow, you've given them everything. Here's a question from Kathy. She wants us to think of more creative consequences. So they only give consequences when the kids disobey. For example, she sent them out to clean up the backyard from the dog, and they didn't get it all. So now she wants to give them a consequence. What's a creative and effective consequence? Well, I really focus a lot on positive behavioral support, which is a big buzzword. There's natural consequences. There's this can't be done until that's done. So it obviously didn't get done, so you go back out and do it some more. I'm not a real punitive kind of person. I really want my kids to learn to do things from an intrinsic motivation. And so when you talk about creative consequences, I can just share with you some of the things that I do, which is, they lose a privilege. If they don't clean up the dog doo-doo well, then they get an additional dog doo-doo practice session. And I sometimes go out there and practice with them so that they know. Remember, you never ask a child to do what you haven't done yourself. They're not your servants. So when you talk about consequences, try to match the consequence with the crime. And I don't think you really need to be too creative with that, because every infraction usually has a natural consequence to it. Well, remember, we're talking to a new guy today. So I'm kind of switching gears on you here. We're talking to Dr. Eric Scalise. We're going to be talking to him about his organization, Hope for the Heart. And this is really helping people deal with the fear and the worry and the grief, loneliness and isolation that we're all facing. So please stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome, welcome. I'm here with Dr. Scalise, and he is the president of the LIV Consulting, and that stands for
Leadership, Integrity, and Values.
Leadership, Integrity, and Values. He currently serves as Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer for Hope for the Heart, and he's also the former Senior Vice President for the American Association of Christian Counselors and the former Department Chair for Counseling Programs at Regent University in Virginia Beach. He is a licensed professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist with 40 years of clinical and professional experience. If I keep reading, pretty soon I'm going to be so overwhelmed by your credentials, but I have to keep reading. It's just a need here. And let's see. Okay, so his specialty areas include marriage and family issues, which is very relevant, isn't it? Professional pastoral stress and burnout, combat trauma and PTSD, grief and loss, addictions and recovery, leadership development, and lay counselor training. And we really want to get into the lay counselor training today. As the son of a diplomat, Dr. Scalise, maybe you've heard that name before, was born in, I don't even know if I know how to pronounce this, Nicosia, Cyprus? Nicosia, yeah, I didn't know how to pronounce it, and has also lived and traveled extensively around the world. He's a published author, adjunct professor at several Christian universities, conference speaker, and frequently works with organizations, clinicians, ministry leaders, and churches on a variety of issues. Dr. Scalise and his wife Donna have been married for 40 years. That's credential enough, right? And they have twin sons, and they are both combat veterans serving in the U.S. Marine Corps, and 4 grandchildren. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. That was a mouthful. You can just introduce me as Donna's husband if you want.
Well, I know this credentialing thing maybe isn't that big a deal. We're all just servants of the Most High God, but someone listening might go, I'm going to stop and listen to this guy because he has something to say. I mean, you can't have lived life to this extent without having something to say. And so that being said, I want to get on to, first of all, I want to talk about Lifeline and the idea of training counselors, lay counselors. That's a phenomenal idea to me. So how did you come up with this idea? Or
Well, I'm clinically trained, as you just read on my short bio, and I've lived in that space for many years, but I've always had a passion for the church. When I would train counseling students at the university, I'd often look at them and say, you might have 1 hour a week with your client, maybe every other week. There are 168 hours in a week. And the people you're seeing are probably going to need more support and care than you can give them. You must connect with the church. You must connect with some additional resources. And much the same way people go get certification as lifeguards, as CPR people, basic or advanced first aid. You don't have to have a medical degree or something to do something. And as I was studying the research, and you might find this fascinating, we now know that the most determinant factor of whether or not people get help, whether they feel like they get some relief in what's ever going on in their life, experience a greater measure of hope, get unstuck, has nothing to do, I shouldn't say nothing, little to do or less to do with what technique you used, what theoretical orientation you come from. It's all based on the relationship between the person seeking help and the one offering it. And so I thought anyone can get some basic training on how to be a better people helper. And so I've lived in the, let's call it lay caregiving space for, 30 years now. And when I came to Hope for the Heart, we had all these rich, wonderful resources on a myriad of topics. I often say I've never seen anything so broad topically and yet so deep biblically. Mm-hmm. And so we had Legos in a bucket. I said, let's start building stuff. Let's start equipping people, the church, not necessarily the organization, but people like you and I, the body of Christ, to learn how to come alongside others. And that's what Lifeline to Hope is really all about.
And I know that I have listeners right now that are going, where can I learn more? So you have a website that they can go to.
Yes, simply hopefortheheart.org, and it's all just spelled out, hopefortheheart.org. You can go to our store and see what the resources are. We have a basic or core training course, and we have both one course that can be done in a group setting, and then because of COVID-19 and all the distancing that was taking place and the fact that churches weren't even gathering, we developed a self-study version so people could learn some of this without having to gather in a group. So we have both versions, and that basically, hopefully, equips a person to be a competent people helper. And then with that, we have all these topical videos. June Hunt, our founder, is on them. I'm on them. Another guest you're going to have, a colleague of mine, Haley Scalise. She and I have conversation on all these topics. So you can get some basic training on just how to come alongside a person, practice the ministry of presence, if you will. And then if you want to go a little deeper on a particular subject like anxiety or forgiveness or depression or a host of topics. We filmed 50 of those topics, and so it's a great library of resources that hopefully will be an equipper and an encourager for people.
Yeah, Hope for the Heart, the title itself gives one a little bit of hope. I don't know about you, but I'd rather have physical pain than emotional pain. There's just something so devastating about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I find that people of faith wrestle with their emotions. Almost to have emotions such as fear or depression, it would be, or anxiety, is sinful, and there's so much shame and guilt associated, and that's why historically I think the church has stigmatized people who go through trauma and crisis and have come out of abuse, wrestle with addiction, and so we don't talk about it. And yet the same pain that's quote unquote out there in the world, it's sitting in those pews every Sunday as well. Everyone knows it. It's a little bit of the elephant in the room. And so we have to talk about our emotions. We have to talk about what's going on in our thinking level and how it's impacting us, our relationships, our life, how we walk with God or don't walk with Him. It's all connected.
And is it different for different age groups?
Sure. I find it interesting that we live in probably the most technologically advanced world ever, but probably also not only are we technologically connected, we're the most relationally disconnected society ever. And if you think about it and go all the way back to the garden, we were created out of relationship. We were created for relationship and in relationship. And that's why COVID in particular has been such a devastating thing globally. So how people process emotion and relationships is different. I mean, there are developmental differences between how a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old might process something and how a teenager might, or an adult. Because generationally there are different cultural differences in how people approach it. Like, millennials and younger, they don't use their cell phone even to talk. It's all texting and everything. It's just different. And so I think it's important to understand some of those differences if we're going to do a good job in connecting with others.
Now, if someone gets certified or goes through the training, how do they promote their ability to help someone, or do they just quietly go about doing it?
Well, I think there's different ways. I mean, we're very careful to say we're not training people to be therapists, right? That's a professional training approach. It's done at a university. There's other things. We're training people to be biblical, competent people helpers. And we do, if you go through the core training, we do provide what we call a certificate of completion. And some people already are engaged in ministry at their church, through an organization. Maybe they're a small group leader or a home group leader. Maybe they help lead or facilitate support groups like Celebrate Recovery or Grief Share or Divorce Care, some of these. And this just helps them do that a little bit better. I have also worked with churches, and we are actually engaging different congregations with this, how a church can actually create and set up a ministry of lay people helping, where the pastor and the leadership can have some others that they can guide there. Most pastors I've met don't necessarily feel called to the ministry primarily to counsel people. They want to preach and teach, and yet roughly 75% of anyone who's in trouble, if they're a person of faith, the first person they want to talk to is their priest, their rabbi, or their pastor. So pastors get inundated, even though they don't necessarily ever get trained in seminary, don't necessarily feel called to it. So part of Lifeline is to provide a resource for the church so others who are already part of that faith community, who do feel called, are excited about it, are already doing it, can come alongside the pastor and the church leadership.
Well, we have to end this first part of the show, and I have so many more questions, so I hope our listeners will come back for the second part that will air tomorrow. Thank you, Dr. Scalise, and we look forward to talking more about how not only we can help others in this journey called life, but ourselves can experience a fuller life because of our emotional health. Well, thank you for being with us, and I have one last thing to say, and that is God bless.
You have been listening to Homeschool Companion, a production of MRG Media. Be sure to join us on Facebook. Just type in the name Homeschool Companion. For more on this or to contact us, go to mrgmediaministries.com. That's all one word, mrgmediaministries.com.